Hello and welcome to the Secret Agents of Consciousness podcast. My name is Genevieve Faulkner, your host. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hey! So today I wanted to talk to you guys about avoidance. What are you avoiding in your life? So the thing is with avoidance, people will often do it because they go into overwhelm. They feel like they can't cope with a situation. They don't know how to handle the situation or the event or the person or whatever it is that you're avoiding. And yet when you do that, you actually take yourself out of the power to change the situation, and you make yourself, you make that situation or that person or that thing greater than you are. Okay, so you become the effect of whatever that is. And so is that your best choice? Now I spoke about people pleasing last week, and that kind of being like a trauma response and a way of kind of managing trauma based upon like the abuse that you may have experienced in childhood or in the past. And withdrawal or avoidance is often another like response that people have. So when you've had like abusive situations or whatever in the past, you can create this need to avoid either the energy that you have stored, like the trauma, the pain, the suffering, the feelings that you have based upon feeling like it's too much, too hard. And then you can kind of go into avoidance of people or other things based upon not kind of wanting like that energy to come up, or like being kind of like triggered, the avoidance of being triggered and not knowing how to handle. So what if you're actually able to like deal with anything that is within your own world? Like what if you didn't need to avoid anything within you, first of all? Any thoughts, any feelings, any decisions, any judgments, any part of you that you're judging, what if you didn't need to avoid any of it? What if you as a being actually have the capacity and the power to be able to deal with anything within your own world? So if you know that, and sometimes in my own experience, it can be extremely uncomfortable, not going into avoidance and being willing to be really present with whatever you've kind of locked or suppressed in your own world. It can be intense, it can be uncomfortable, it can be emotional, but that is where you will get the most change if you're willing to be present and look at anything within your world that isn't working or that you have previously tried to avoid. Now, I'd like to invite you to look at what it is that you're avoiding that may look kind of outside of you as well, because that is where you might be limiting the change that can be created for you in your life. So are you willing to be anything that you're not truly willing to be present with? That is where you are keeping yourself stuck. So are you willing to look and be totally present with your financial reality? Or is there avoidance there? What do you do when you look at your bank accounts? What do you do when you have to do accounts? What do you do when you receive money from someone or receive your paycheck? Do you be present with it? Do you be grateful? Do you acknowledge the judgments that come up or the conclusions? Or do you go into avoidance and withdrawal? So there's kind of different ways that people do avoidance. Sometimes it's just withdrawing and running away. Sometimes it can be through denial and disassociating. So people can go into kind of this fantasy delusional reality that's not actually what they're experiencing in physical reality. And so if you're somebody that has a lot of daydream fantasies and you're constantly kind of in your head, but you're not being present, you might want to look at, okay, what is it that I'm avoiding in physical reality that if I would actually be present with it would allow me to change everything? Another way people will do avoidance is to have the point of view that something is right. They've gotten something right. When you decide that you've got something right, it's effectively putting like putting something in a box and being like, okay, cool, don't need to deal with that, don't need to look at that because I've got it right. So it's actually a way of avoiding things. So like for me, I've done this in relationship. Before, like I had the point of view that kind of like my relationship was right. And it was from that, like I was willing to look at so many different areas of my life and kind of like unravel the energy and look at what like needed to change. And yet, because that point of view, like I had the point of view that that was right, I didn't kind of like, wasn't willing to go like to the depth of what was required to create the change. And it's only since kind of like I've like left that relationship that all of this other stuff has kind of like bubbled to the surface that is now allowing to me to kind of like change and go beyond the stuff that I was hiding beneath the rightness of that relationship. And so maybe there's some of you listening that are doing the same thing. So what if you guys decided that you've got right in order to avoid the things that you've suppressed, that you don't know how to deal with or don't want to deal with, that you're hiding beneath the rightness? So what if you didn't do that anymore? What if you were willing to kind of like have the point of view of like, okay, if nothing was right in my world, if I hadn't got anything right, if nothing was wrong, if I was willing to be present with absolutely everything in my world, what could I become aware of that I'm not presently aware of? What could change for me from that space if I had no judgment of anything that I'm currently in, of anything that I'm choosing, or anything that I've experienced in the past? So, as I said, like you might want to look at like what, like the different areas. Is there something that you're avoiding in your financial reality? Is there something that you're avoiding in your relationships? Are you willing to be, because sometimes people will do avoidance and kind of like disassociation, denial, not being present, to avoid the judgment that is in the relationship. Are you willing to be present with people's judgments? Or are you trying to avoid them? When you try to avoid them, what you'll do is it kind of like, it sometimes like people pleasers, as like I spoke about last week, like will do this. They'll have this thing where they will people please, but then they'll also have this withdrawal avoidance type thing going on, where they'll want to like withdraw from people and avoid people because they don't know how to be themselves with people. And so they effectively feel like in order to like get a sense of them, they have to be alone. And so because they're so aware of the judgments and the projections that other people have, they don't know how to deal with it. And so they have this like need to be like a need to avoid. So what if you could be totally present with other people's judgments, with other people's conclusions, with other people's definitions of you and of themselves and all their emotional intensities without having to avoid it? How much more space would you have to be willing to occupy to not have to avoid anything? Because the thing is that when you do avoidance also, it's kind of like you'll start to contract your energy down because you're like, I don't want to deal with this, which makes it greater than you, right? So what if you actually, in order to have ease with everything, you've got to be willing to be more space. How much more space would you have to occupy in order to be at ease with everybody's points of view about you, about themselves, everything that they're suppressing? Okay, so what else are you guys avoiding in regards to people? So I know that for me, like something on my journey that I've avoided a lot is like when somebody has a need of me. Like if I sense like need, it's like, run. And yet that makes, as I said, like when you do that, you make yourself the effect of the need. Okay? So you can't create anything greater than that person's reality. And so what if you could be in total allowance of the needs that other people project and not have to avoid them? So it kind of ties into the people pleasing conversation, because in order to do that, you've got to like acknowledge that you have choice in relationships. You don't actually have to fulfill other people's needs. You don't have to make them significant. It doesn't, like, just because you're aware of something doesn't mean that you've got to do anything in order to please them, change the situation. Like, what if you could just be aware without having to handle everything? So sometimes people have the point of view that if they're aware of something, they're then responsible for it. What if that isn't actually the case? What if you could be in question with your awareness of, is this relevant to me? Like, what is it that I have to kind of like be aware of and deal with and manage and handle and choose to create or choose different? And what is it that I'm aware of that has no relevance and that I don't have to do anything with? Because sometimes people will go into avoidance of things that isn't actually their kind of like job to do anything with anyway. So in Access Consciousness, when you want to change something, there's 4 questions that you can ask, which is, what is this? What can I do with this? Can I change it? How can I change it? Sometimes you can't change things because it's somebody else's stuff. If they're not willing to change, you can't actually change things for them. But that doesn't mean you've got to avoid it. If you're willing to be present with it, you don't have to be the effect of it. Now, if you're avoiding particular things with people, it's because you will have like a similar thing that you've suppressed in your world that you're avoiding looking at, that creates the avoidance of whatever it is that they've got going on. So for example, like if you've got a lot of, if you've kind of like stored a lot of suppressed rage within your world, or you've got a lot of suppressed rage, when you're around somebody that's doing like, has a lot of suppressed rage too, you might find it like really difficult to be with them and you may want to go into avoidance and withdrawal. And yet if you had no point of view about the suppressed rage, because you didn't like have all of that like energetic content within your own world or within your own body, you could actually be at ease with that energy. Okay, so what energy, what vibrational frequencies, what emotional intensities are you guys avoiding that if you didn't avoid them would allow you to create a reality beyond them? And who are you being when you do avoidance? Because sometimes avoidance is kind of like a mimicry thing. We sometimes learn it from the people that we grew up with. So who did you learn to withdraw and avoid from? And do you desire to have their life? Because when you mimic somebody's behavior, when you be like them, based upon like mimicking them, because that's what you think like you should be, you're effectively recreating whatever it is that they've created. So look at the people that you've learnt how to kind of like behave from. Is that what you truly desire your life to be? And so if you desire something greater than what they have, what if you could choose, what if you could be the courageous demand? Okay, I am not going to avoid anything anymore. I'm not going to avoid people. I'm not going to avoid like the judgments I have of me. I'm not going to avoid the things that aren't working in my life. I'm going to get present with everything, no matter how uncomfortable it is. So what if it's like from making that choice, you can start to change your entire reality. You can start to reclaim the power of you that you may be suppressing, hiding, or that you've given up based upon feeling like you have no power, based upon maybe like experiences that you had as a kid that you have like suppressed or that you haven't dealt with, that like you no longer need to carry with you. So beyond all of that, beyond all of the things in the past that you didn't know how to manage or deal with, beyond the times and spaces that you may be energetically stuck in, like beyond the ages that you may be energetically stuck in. If you allowed all of that, if you were present with it and acknowledged that it was there and then allowed it to dissipate, would you need to avoid anything in your life anymore? Because that's the thing with this also, is like when we do avoidance and withdrawal, sometimes it's because we're going into being like an energetic child. We're not like being the conscious adults. We're not being like the kind of like leaders and the drivers of our own reality. We're like, I don't know how to handle this because I'm like a kid, because of whatever happened when you were a child, or whatever like trauma that you've experienced. And so if you be present with all of that, it can change the energy. Like you no longer need to hold on to it. And then there's more power and potency for you to create your reality the way that you would like it, as like in the present moment. There is more access to awareness, because when you're avoiding anything, you actually exclude the awareness that you can have from being present with that thing. And what if like one of the greatest powers you have, one of the greatest potencies you have, is your capacity to be aware. The willingness to be aware, no matter how uncomfortable it is, because sometimes it is so uncomfortable. But the willingness to be aware stops you being a victim. It stops others being able to control you. It stops you having to live like in the limited reality that most people function in, because if you're willing to be aware, there's always like another choice. There is always like more awareness to be had. And the universe will always guide you to greater if you're willing to be aware. So how much awareness are you guys avoiding? What if every single situation, what if everything that you've kind of like solidified that you don't want to deal with, what if there is like the gift of awareness within it? So what if you could now receive all of the gifts of the awareness that you've been avoiding? And what if you were strong enough to be able to have those awarenesses without falling apart, without breaking, without like totally losing yourself? So if you would like some assistance with like unraveling the points of view that you have around avoidance, I did do a call a while ago called What Are You Avoiding? You can check that out on my website, which will just like clear lots of things in relation to the blocks that you may have in certain areas. Yeah, and if you are beginning to get present with the areas in your life that have been uncomfortable, and it kind of feels like too much, too overwhelming, or the emotional energies are like really intense, remember to expand out, be bigger than the planet. Remind yourself that you are a powerful, infinite being that has like way more capacity to handle things than maybe you previously acknowledged. And if you need to, go get a bars session, Access Bars, which you can find at www.accessconsciousness.com. Find someone in your area to run your bars, and it will help you have so much more ease with your awareness and all of the emotional intensities that come up. And it will just allow it to all dissipate. And then it's kind of like you just get to be the space of you. And then as you do that, more and more, there's way more ease and less avoidance. So thank you so much, guys, for listening. If there is any topic that you would like me to talk about, please do leave a comment or email me. And yeah, if this has contributed to you, please do leave a comment for me. I love hearing feedback from you guys. Thank you so much.